Hi everyone. This video will be the tutorial for the SPSS Survival Manual homework for Chapter 5 on screening and cleaning data. So I'm going to take you through the steps that are involved in your homework. Do remember that when you're done with your homework to save your output file and upload it to the appropriate Dropbox. So we start out the process, and you can see that I already have the survey.save data file open on my desktop and ready to go. The description of the steps are also in your textbook, in your Pallant text on pages 45 to 47, and it explains the steps. Now, when we're doing screening of data, what we're trying to do is to make sure that there aren't errors in data entry or somehow bizarre answers that got into our data set that need to be cleaned up. This used to happen a lot more when we had to manually enter data into either a spreadsheet or directly into SPSS. I've been using electronic intranet surveys for a long time now, and as a result, I don't have as much trouble with data that comes in and is mistakenly entered. Still though, when there are times when I have to recode into numeric form open-ended responses, such as if you gave people an empty space and had them write in what their marital status is, I would eventually have to go in and code that into categories. So it is possible that errors get made when the numbers get put in or plugged in, or when you have to do some manual coding of the data. So we're going to start with our qualitative variables, which are our nominal variables, and demonstrate how to screen those and make sure you don't have what your author, Pallant, calls out-of-range responses. So you start by going to Analyze, and you select Descriptive Statistics, and you move over and select Frequencies. And that brings up the dialog box. Now, these are the variables. I was playing with this earlier, so I'm going to hit the reset button to demonstrate how to move those variables over. You can either do them one at a time by selecting one and moving it over with the arrow, or here's a crafty trick. If you hold down your control key on your keyboard, you can select more than one variable. You see how they turn gray, and then you can move them all over at the same time. So now I've got them all in the variables box where I want them. So I click on Statistics, and since these are qualitative variables and they are nominal in nature, I really just want to see the minimum and the maximum so that I can tell whether there are out-of-range responses. So once I've ticked the buttons minimum and maximum, I'm ready. In the dispersion section, and that's this word right here, I don't need any of the central tendency because these are nominal data, they're qualitative. Those values wouldn't really mean anything if we clicked on them and looked at that data. So now I'm ready to go. The output file opens up. You know, the first thing that you can look at on this screen, it shows you how many valid cases, that means answers, the number of cases who gave answers to the particular question that you're looking at. The variables that we selected for the analysis are across the top. The number of valid cases, meaning answers, in the first column. Missing means those were blank. That means that this number of individuals, so one person didn't answer the do you have children currently living at home question, 17 didn't answer the stress question, 3 didn't answer the smoking question. Then you look at the minimum and the maximum. Now here's where you have to go back to your code book and know how many options were there for responses to each of these questions. For sex, and we've talked about this before, they only gave the participants in this study 2 choices, male and female. Obviously, you know, you could question why were there only those 2 choices, but that's an argument for another day. So we know there were only 2 choices, and those were the only responses that were given. For marital status, there were 8 choices. For do you have children living at home, there were 2 choices, yes or no. For major source of stress, there were 9 options. And for do you smoke, there were 2 options, yes and no. Now, if I further examine the data, I can get, just an eyeball sense of the frequency and percentage of males and females in the sample. And I can look at how many were in each of the categories for marital status, how many were in each of the responses, yes and no, and then also how many missing cases there were. If you have a data set and you have a really high number of missing cases, it could be that people misunderstood the question, or a question was particularly hot button and they didn't want to answer it. Either way, if you have a question with a ton of missing data and it's a critical question to your research, you've got a problem and you need to go back and look at why that happened. Sources of stress, and here you've got, out of 430, over 400 people in your sample, 17 items of missing data is not a particularly big problem. And same for do you smoke, a very small number of missing cases. So that's number 1 on your homework. Now we need to take a look at the quantitative variables. And these, you use a slightly different procedure, very slightly. You go to Analyze and Descriptive Statistics again. And this time we want to look at the items making up the optimism scale, the items making up the life satisfaction scale, and the items making up the perceived stress scale. So we go to Descriptive Statistics, and since these are items that are responded to on a rating scale, and we've declared them in SPSS terms, interval ratio data, we use descriptives. And again, I was playing with this earlier to refresh my memory of the requirements of this homework. So I'm going to reset and show you how to move these variables over. Now, you may want to make this dialog box a little bit bigger if it's easier to see, so you can stretch it if you want. So the sets of variables that we want are the items making up the optimism scale as first. So again, I can either move the items over individually, or I can hold down the control key, highlight the group, and move them over as a group. The next step is to click on Options here and make sure that the boxes are ticked that you need to be ticked. So you need the mean, you need the standard deviation, and you need the minimum and the maximum, which are over here. And then you click Continue, and you click OK. Now this time, what you're looking for, these are, the separate items making up the optimism scale. The first column, you have how many people responded to the questions and the total number of cases. The minimum and maximum tells you if you know that responses, and we know this from the code book, that responses are made on a 5-point scale from 1 to 5. The minimum is 1 for each item and the maximum is 5 for each item. That suggests to you right away that there are no unusual values in terms of responding to the scale. The other option is you can go in and eyeball the data set, but if you have a very large data set, that's a laborious operation. It's easier to go in and look at the minimum and maximum. So what would happen, say, if you had, for optimism 4, the 4th item on the scale, there's an entry of a 7, and you know that there shouldn't be a 7, then that would be a data entry error, and you would have to go in and look and find that case and go back and look at the original raw data and find out what happened before you can go forward. And it may turn out that you have to eliminate that case that has the anomalous response involved. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the remainder of the variables. Again, I'm going to hit the reset button. This time I need to look for all of the items for life satisfaction. So that's life sat 1 through 5. And I'm going to hold down my control key and move all of them over at once. Again, you can move them one at a time if you want. And I'm going to click on options. Sorry, my dogs are barking. And make sure that the mean, standard deviation, minimum, and maximum are checked. And then I'm going to hit OK. Now, items on this scale are responded to on a scale from 1 to 7. Dolly. Shh. Sorry. Responses are made on a scale from 1 to 7, and we do not have any anomalous anomalous responses. Go back to descriptives, hit the reset button, and the last one I need to look at is perceived stress on the PSS. So I'm going to hold my control key down again. There are 10 items on the perceived stress scale. I'm going to move them all over, going to be super obsessive and check to see that the mean, standard deviation, minimum, and maximum boxes are checked. And I'm going to hit continue and OK. And I can look here, and when I look, I have minimums and maximums, and here you have to be a little careful before you declare something an out-of-range variable or an out-of-range response. The minimum possible is 1 because responses are made on a scale from 1 to 5. That doesn't mean one of your minimums on a particular item couldn't be within that range between 1 and 5. So you see with PSS items 4, 5, 7, and 8, there were no participants who entered a value of 1 as their response. The lowest item is a 2, or the lowest response was a 2. The highest response on all of them was a 5. Those 2s are not out of range values. They are inside the range between the minimum possible and the maximum possible. So we have no out of range values for perceived stress. Now, as we did with the last homework, you want to save. So you're going to go Save As. And you might see here I have folders for each of you in my OneDrive to save your homeworks. I'm going to go into my Pallant folder, my homework folder, and this would be chapter 5.spv for my output. And there you go. That's it for chapter 5.